The NFL debuted its new kickoff rules in the Hall of Fame game between the Texans and the Bears, and it was not well received, and for good reason. I'll explain, and just to set the stage, D'Amico Ryans was asked by Landry Locker the other day about how he felt by the kickoff rules. D'Amico loves hard-hitting, violent football. As a player, he was like that. As a coach, he encourages it. So I think it's telling when he gives his appraisal of the kickoff. And pay attention to these hits I'm going to show while he's talking, and tell me how they look different than just big and violent hits.
What I noticed from the kickoff is just it's definitely a lot of big hits, a lot of violent hits, and I think it's tough. Like the 5 yard gap between the guys is tough to as a kickoff return unit to get back, to get your feet set, and to actually get a guy blocked. It's tough. So what you saw is you saw a lot of guys running free, and you saw returners running downhill full speed. So you saw a lot more collisions than you've seen, on the kickoff in the past couple years. So definitely some work to do is when it comes to cleaning it up when you're trying to get those blocks. It's tough to block a guy when he's full speed. He's on you at 5 yards. You got to turn around as quickly as possible. What I saw is a lot of guys unimpeded to the returner. Jake Hansen, he beats his block and he comes off, and man, he's on the returner very quickly. He ended up coming out of the game.
There was nothing exciting about those hits. And I think both Bears fans and Texans fans like myself, and most of those hits were thinking like, oh man, it looked like he was bent weirdly. Whether it was the guy tackling or the guy being tackled or one of the other coverage guys or one of the blockers, it was just a whole lot of ugliness, and maybe that'll get better over time. This is a very small sample size. But even on that play where somebody got injured in this play that's supposed to be safer, it was the guy making the tackle because he was free, but there was somebody attached to him. It's just ugly. So it's not these scintillating hits. It's more like a car is on a slippery, icy road, and they're like, oh crap, I'm gonna hit the. And to be clear, I'll have Charles Davis in a video he did for Madden very briefly explain what the goals of the NFL were when they implemented these new rules.
The dynamic kickoff will keep the excitement of kickoff returns in the game while returning the injury rate closer to that of a traditional scrimmage play.
Okay, I love Charles Davis, and yet I feel like his prediction over the course of just one game so far was drastically inaccurate because there were no big returns. I didn't even really see any opportunities for big returns, and that's going to change. I'm sure there'll be some big returns during the preseason, but it did not look any safer than the old kickoff returns. It doesn't look any safer than a normal football play. It looked ugly and awkward, and it almost looked like guys are penalized for doing the right thing because they're making contact when they're kind of like awkward and askew and their left ACL is bent at a 45-degree angle. I don't like it, man. I don't like it. And then the other part of it, and I imagine this will get a little bit better, but as expected, it's really hard to officiate because the defense can't move until the ball touches the ground or somebody touches it. Well, to officiate that, you got to have your eyeballs in two different locations at the same time. And it starts to feel like that other least popular play in football, the clock expiring to 0, and then the play goes on. So there were a couple of penalties in this game. Once when a return blocker left too early, another where a Texans coverage guy was offsides, and I didn't see it. It looked like he wasn't. There was only one thing I liked about this, and it was the new rule that you're allowed to have a 12th guy on the coverage team just to hold the ball for the kicker, but then he has to run off immediately. And ESPN was kind enough to do a delightful little piece on Mojo, who back in the 80s and 90s was the guy who would run onto the field at Houston Oilers games and grab the tee, and very colorfully and entertainingly so.
This was, I think, in just a different era, Troy.
Yes, it was. I mean, this is phenomenal. There's a lot of Houston fans obviously watching this game that were once Oilers for
back in a 4-yard game. Here he is getting back to the sideline, and Mojo doing his thing.
So my initial thoughts about this play are, get it the hell off my football field. I don't want my players subjected to this. I don't want other human beings subjected to this as participants or observers. Feels like being forced to watch some weird pornography that you're super not into. Not just claiming that you're not into it, you're totally not into it. If they do insist on continuing this experiment, and the NFL has said they're open to tweaking the rules, I would say that there have been instances in the past where the league has tried to make the game safer, and it initially didn't work. Like when they introduced plastic helmets, they just turned into battering rams for those dudes back in the day who were those guys had been to war, and they went kamikaze on the opponent's ass with those plastic helmets, so they had to figure out how to use it better. I mean, you could argue that for the long term, it probably was the worst thing. Plastic helmets are really good at preventing skull fractures, which used to be a much bigger problem, but not so good at preventing thousands of episodes of head trauma. But I digress, because I've had so many damn concussions in my life. I would love to say I eagerly await to see how the NFL tweaks this, but I fear that they're going to move way too slow on it. And I would like to just, let's go back to either getting rid of the kickoff or turn it back to the old rules and just let everybody kick it out of the end zone, and let's be done with it. And I realize that some of you watching this video might be completely unacquainted with these new rules. So here's Chaz Davis once again explaining the rules.
The kicking team will kick off from its own 35-yard line. 10 members of the kicking team will line up on the receiving team's 40-yard line. Up to 2 returners line up in the landing zone. The landing zone is between the receiving team's 20-yard line and goal line. Play begins when the ball is either caught or hits the ground in the landing zone or is returned from the end zone. Any kick that bounces from the landing zone to the end zone must be returned or downed by the receiving team for a touchback and possession at its 20-yard line. If a kick fails to reach the landing zone, the receiving team takes possession at its 40-yard line. If the ball enters the end zone in the air, the receiving team can return it or down it for a touchback and take possession at its 30-yard line. If the ball goes out of bounds, the receiving team takes possession at its 40-yard line.